Welcome to the UAC podcast. I'm Joseph Johnson with you again, joined by friends and authors Jed Smith and Dr. Peter Smolyanov, who wrote the Fringe Methodologies of High Performance and Health. And we're going through the book kind of one piece at a time, looking at different sections more in depth. And this week we're going to look at the integration of yoga into sports, as a methodology that probably now is I would say probably it's become mainstream, especially amongst people who are older, just trying to stay in shape or whatever, and maybe younger as well. But it's become kind of a mainstream practice now, where maybe 30 years ago it would have been esoteric, and now it's started to kind of make its way into sports, and on a couple of different fronts. What I'm hearing from people is they're using it as a meditation piece, or maybe just kind of a recovery day, if you will, after maybe some more difficult workouts. Jed, when you guys were writing, what was the premise there with like the application of yoga into sports and how it was useful? And also, are there any cautions with it as well?
Yeah, there's actually that's a pretty big question. First of all, Joseph, I would say flexibility is important for athletics, but it depends upon what sport and how much flexibility. We can get into that a little bit later. But yoga per se, and there's multiple forms of yoga, has really entered into athletics, here in the United States, I would imagine in the last, 15 to 20 years. And the premise would be what forms of stretching really benefit an athlete, and what's the reasoning for it. Like you had said, meditation, relaxation, concentration, those are all great and necessary uses. But then, just for recovery methods on the tissue and the body and the compression forces of playing sport, running, collisions, the lifting, and so forth, is just great restorative methods. And I think more in the East, obviously, these practices have been employed for much, much, much longer than in the West. But I know Peter has mentioned in previous podcasts that this would have been fringe in the U.S. 15 years ago, but not fringe overseas. And I'm sure I don't know if they called it yoga when you were an athlete, Peter, or if it was just your own. If the Soviet system had their own variations based on Eastern yoga philosophies, or I'm not sure, but it's very prevalent now in all sports around the entire world.
Yes, it has been integrated into both top class, high level programs for in past 50 years. And in Eastern Europe, it has been integrated in both high performance programs and some mass participation programs. You can see old posters now of mass preparation for Ready for Labor and Defense program, where flexibility is part of the requirements. You have to touch your toes, or at least, or you have to touch the floor with your palms, as some of the key requirements. But in preparation to be able to do this, there were yoga exercises given, and you can see them on very old posters on 1930s, 1940s, and these are not just yoga, but also some Tai Chi exercises that you can see people are doing in parks now, and you can see a lot of Asians doing it in the West, but now it's becoming, it's still fringe, but it's now becoming a mass, almost mass movement, Tai Chi and Qigong, as yoga was 20 years ago. starting in especially in California, and then all these Hollywood movies showed it as a weird kind of thing, but now it's common. So yes, it has been coming from East. In Eastern Europe, it was part of both top class high performance preparation programs and mass participation programs. It was integrated in our general conditioning programs for teenagers. For long-term athlete development, we were taught to use the basic yoga routines that are now described as the critical, most important exercises for everyone. If you read our book, we reference several books on life longevity and how to prolong life, fountain of life and so forth. They recommend 5 to 15 different exercises, key most important exercises. These were included in the preparation of young athletes in the Soviet Union as the most important ones. And I think that's a fringe for mass participation programs now in the West. What is fringe for high performance programs in the West that we take from yoga and other Eastern fitness programs is a deeper and more integral and compound, if you wish, inclusion of these exercises, meaning these stretching exercises, stretching yoga exercises, follow your strength set straight away. So you have a set or 2-3 sets of a strength exercise, and the contracted muscle is then stretched straight away after a set of strength exercises. We're still recommending and we're still doing stretching before or after, right? Strength or endurance training, but we more and more are looking into better integration, and this integration was attempted in all programs that JED is using, that we put together, and altogether the programs seem to be beneficial for athletes. So one critical fringe little method that we use there is that we include stretching more frequently into the actual strength program, and where we can, we actually do in one set. After each rep, you do some stretching of the muscle that was experiencing strength or speed or endurance work. So there is like 8 reps that are more targeted towards strength and endurance at the same time, followed by a stretch, or you actually stretch the muscle, and while it's stretched, you strengthen it. You can do a strengthening exercise together with stretching. So you might stretch the spine, let it stretch, right, and then flex it to work on the speed, and you might do a static work. So these are examples of ancient yoga methods where endurance and strength are developed in deeper and closer integration.
Yeah, and those are being utilized, Joseph, mostly on our restorative training units, where an athlete will, like Peter said, you're doing an exercise where you're getting a contraction followed by relaxation and a stretch using gravity, and so there'll be some traction and decompression that takes place. and then active recovery that you're using, whether you do a set and then you stretch, then you do a set and then you stretch. So you're getting active recovery in between, just resting between sets. You're getting good active recovery with certain stretches that make sense, sequenced, where the way it's laid out is you heat up tissue that's being exercised and then stretch. So it's a great active recovery as well as just, again, decompression.
I think a very probably the most simple and the most vivid example of an exercise that that had been used by both high performance athletes like Alexeyev that we mentioned before, and by medical clinical exercise programs, is a back extension on the machine where your legs are fixed horizontally and you lean forward and you fully stretch your spine. Then you lift your trunk up and your long back muscles are contracted.
Yeah, you use a little traction.
As I said, after our discussions with Christos Yakovoi, who worked with Alexeyev, he revealed a number of things that I didn't know. I knew some other things that about Alexeyev practices, but this is something that that Christos gave us to us. It was pretty much a secret of Alexeyev. He probably really didn't want anybody to know how bad his back condition was while he was competing. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to keep it a secret. I'm sure so again, Christos said that he was starting his heavy lifting sessions with many sets, 10 or more sets of this simple back extension exercise, which in essence is a combination of stretching and strengthening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we get into some of the stretching routines or yoga routines that have been used with pro athletes in the United States. For example, Bikram's yoga, Bikram Chodoroy, that's where the hot yoga movement came from. But the New York Jets years ago would have them after football games on a Monday. The players would go in, and again, it's a decompression, it's a flush out from the contact and the abuse that they took on the game day, and just a recovery session to get them moving and very therapeutic. The thing is with Bikram's as well, we get into breathing as well in our book, and different breathing methodologies that are used, coming from all over the world for energy, focus, things like that. But Bikram's yoga utilizes a very special breathing technique that does energize and so forth as well. But the Lakers, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar back in the day, Bikram was over in California, and again, that was fringe. It's really become a lot more mainstream, but it's evolved from there. The Bikrams utilized 1.5 to 2 minute static stretch or static hold. Now you see more vinyasa flow in hot yoga. Static stretching, obviously, 2004, I believe McBride's did the research on static stretching, and holding a static stretch prior to competition is going to it's going to reduce your power output, your force, by roughly 20%, and it's going to impact your performance. So we know now, since 2004, other forms of dynamic movements and so forth are more beneficial prior to competition. And so, but that, again, stretching is very important. There's different types of stretching. Where we're getting involved in that's a little bit more fringe is just the integration of implementing traction and stretching in a restorative workout as active recovery, and how it's better use for your time. And it's just you're able to just, I guess you could say, kill two birds with one stone, or three birds with one
Right.
stone, in some of these training units that are very beneficial for the athletes.
Yeah, I mean, like we said earlier, I mean, it became really popular maybe amongst the soccer mom group, that
Yeah.
the ladies that are still trying to stay fit. I started seeing it maybe about 10, maybe 10, a little bit more than 10 years ago. In professional sports, you started seeing it kind of float in there a little bit. Now, like you said earlier, static stretching, which we've known for quite a while, is not a good idea prior to competition or to training sessions that are going to be explosive, especially. And also, you'll see in yoga some poses that are, I guess if you want to call them extreme, but they require extreme amount of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know that, athletes actually beyond a certain point in flexibility can be counterproductive, being over flexible.
Okay.
For the slack maybe that you may have around the joint, with the musculature. Can you guys speak to that? Like the flexible, like how does an athlete, if they're practicing yoga, how do they know whether or not, hey, maybe I'm pushing that a little bit too far? Like, is there thresholds that they could, you know what I mean, kind of be aware of, or how should they look at that? Because you have somebody who's already maybe naturally just really flexible, right?
Right.
And you have somebody else who's not at all, and you know what I mean? And we know that if somebody is genetically not very flexible, and when we take them beyond their genetic elasticity, the connective tissue could start to, the tendon structures could start to stretch, which aren't elastic. How do you guys look at that?
Well, I'll tell you, some of the things that the Chinese do that are very interesting as far as their weightlifters are concerned in these young kids that come into the sports schools. They take a look at hyper flexible joints. So let's say an athlete, their elbow hyperextends slightly, where it could be dangerous in an overhead lift, and they look at all the joints, and so they would actually prescribe certain exercises for these younger kids to tighten up that joint. For example, bicep curls would never necessarily be beneficial to a weightlifter. It's not going to benefit your snatch or clean and jerk, a bicep curl, but it can, if you prescribe and do extra training sets to shorten, again, that tissue to keep that elbow joint from hyperextending, then they can safely hold weight overhead. So things like that. If they have a hypermobile shoulder, they prescribe dips, for the athlete. And again, dips are probably not very specific in Olympic style weightlifting, but then these athletes will train with and bench presses. So they'll tighten up the shoulder with, on a bench press nowadays is not really that important, again, for overhead and a clean and jerk, but to keep that hypermobile joint, in control, they would definitely prescribe extra exercises for those athletes that help reduce that mobility or flexibility that inhibits that particular sport. And on the other side of the spectrum too, you have to look at certain sports and what's called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demands. So, for example, you can take a volleyball athlete that thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hits with their right arm. If you ask a Division I volleyball athlete, which I see all the time, these gals, if they're right-handed and that's what they hit the ball, hundreds of thousands of times with their right shoulder, you can see that there's more development on the right shoulder and there's less flexibility in that right shoulder. But that tautness and tightness allows them to be able to put more force, exert more force
Right.
onto the ball. So they've developed that from all that training that they've done. They've lost a little bit of flexibility, but they actually gain, a lot more velocity in their hitting. So you have to think about those things, like sports like gymnastics and figure skating and certain sports where flexibility is very important. And there's research showing that the fastest athletes are more taut in the ankle joint. Okay. And so, and I can say anecdotally as well, athletes that can jump very, very high, typically that ankle joint mobility is more stiff. There's more ankle joint stiffness, and that stretch shortening cycle is more efficient. They can exhibit more force because obviously they have a mechanical advantage that they've developed with that tautness. And so sprinters, jumpers, I see with our fastest football players. In fact, the last couple athletes we had drafted, they performed the worst on the entire football team on the Greg Cook's functional movement screens. Like, they failed it.
Yeah.
But then they're the fastest athletes that end up getting drafted.
Yeah,
So
right.
you got to take a look at it with a grain of salt and really it's what are we trying to do with the athlete? What is their sport?
Right.
There's going to be, if they practice running fast all the time, they are going to get a little bit more taut and a little less mobility in that ankle joint. So they, because the SAID principle, that specific adaptation to impose
Right.
demands, but it has to be within a safe range of motion. So obviously if they're too tight, they risk injury. And so you want to be in a range that is safe for their particular sport and what they do. So
neither one is the answer, too tight or too loose.
yeah, it depends upon what your sport is and what
it's contextual. And I think the one thing that you mentioned there was Olympic sprinters are not very flexible.
Yeah.
They're not very flexible people, but once again, they're the fastest in the world. And same with different athletes. If they're overly flexible, they could be real prone to a problem, like cutting and things like that on turf or on grass. And if that knee joint is hypermobile,
Right.
they could be running into some problems there. So there's a balance to the flexibility issue. I think you just got to find that sweet spot. What does the athlete need precisely to perform their sport, and don't stretch, I guess, for the sake of it. Or push it. I guess don't push the flexibility for the sake of doing it. Push it to where it needs to be, and then let off the gas. I think, and
depending upon what the athlete needs to do.
It's all context there. Peter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, more of individualized, personalized approach is becoming more and more critical in the success. We have test parameters, expectations, but more and more we need individualized requirements and tailored requirements of the tests. Static versus dynamic is very important. That Jet mentioned that. Again, all my Soviet athlete development programs were based on dynamic stretching before any training and competition, and static training only after, when you then rest after that or do some more relaxation kind of procedures. So doing dynamic stretching in the beginning, doing static stretching in the beginning of any session is very debatable. From my experience, I was never taught to do any static stretching before I start exercising. It was somewhat dynamic. Plus, Jet mentions warming up and getting more blood circulation in the muscles before as part of the stretching? That yes. So I think before as you just before you stretch and during your stretch, that I see in the West is very strange practice for any Eastern coaches or athletic trainers, doctors. You try to you never cool down a muscle, even if you want to achieve other positive other benefits. You still focus on the benefit of increasing blood circulation, so there is therefore no icing and more dynamic stretching before, icing and static stretching only after any training or competitive activities. Again, this is an approach. I'm not saying it's going to be ideal for hot North American climate and Mediterranean climate in places like Texas or Florida. I think perhaps before training, before competition is okay. When you are overheated before, during, it's fine. But one might question the climatic kind of environmental factors when you are stretching and when you are using ice. In northern United States, this perhaps might not be ideal. You need more warming up and more dynamic stretching before anything that you do throughout the year, and then more static, more cooling down only when you're finished with your training or competition. So that is just some practical fringe tips. Also, in terms of tests, what we see emerging is integration of some yoga and some stretching exercises in the tests, and we can see FitnessGram, Presidential Fitness Test, and FitnessGram in the United States. Including such things as Cobra. You lay down on the floor and you lift your trunk as high as you can, and you measure how high you can bend up. So this is an example of instead of doing toe touches and reaching your toes standing, you're doing more of a exercise that is focused on health and is possible to do for anybody, even with any kind of health issues, spine problems, people in any condition can do this without hurting themselves. So this is a trend, and this is a trend for fitness tests that are used both in high performance sport and at schools and other youth fitness club type environment, where we use more therapeutic and more medical and more recovery type stretching and yoga exercises in our tests that we use for general fitness and for preparation to sport specific competitions and programs. We're going to see more of this. I think we, as in the coaching world, can do a lot more to integrate these exercises into tests, so that you achieve two things. You're inclusive. You're not discriminating anybody. Anybody can do this Cobra thing, stretches, but you also encourage participants to prepare for this test by doing the actual drills, by doing the test protocol on themselves once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, so that the healthy kind of therapeutic preventative exercises become part of the test preparation process, become habits, lifelong habits of your participants. Jed.
You know, I think that is, I think that's very good. It's and the integration you're seeing too is even in the elementary schools now. All my kids have been doing yoga, even with COVID-19. They have their physical education instructors teaching the poses and things on Zoom and so forth. So you're seeing in the school systems more and more, obviously, the use of the yoga, as well as you know, in the sport programs. So it's really not fringe. The thing that I'm most interested in was listening to you, Peter, is the fact that in 2004 in the U.S. the research showed that the static stretching impeded your athletic performance, but yet you were practicing where you only did static after exercise and dynamic before, way back in the Soviet Union. So my guess is that research was done long before.
In 1970s, we knew that we were doing this in 1970s. Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You know, so Josef, you think that's that was a big takeaway for me in this podcast. I thought that was great.
Yeah, interesting. It's this is really like a crazy. I'm thinking, like, I'm going through my head and like what you hear in mainstream, and you know the changes that stretching in general has taken. You know, you've heard, oh God, you got a static stretch before you do anything. I mean, you know, 20 years ago, maybe 30, got a static stretch. You know,
Right.
And then yoga came along and started to bring it, you know, kind of work its way into sports. And what you guys talked about, I think is the important issues for people is like, look, don't get carried away with the idea of flexibility for its own sake, or static stretching in the wrong place, or
Right.
you know, whatever the case may be. It's context, I think, is really, you know, what I try to like give away to people is all this is contextual. Everything that, you know, that as it relates to stretching, the use of yoga, Tai Chi might be a little bit more benign because it doesn't really require any, you know, stretches.
It's dynamic. It's all dynamic.
Yeah, it's dynamic. It's contextual too. Like it's well, when should you use it? How do you integrate it? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Like,
Well, I want to point back out to you know, and we mentioned it earlier, and I think this is probably a good takeaway, like one of the main takeaways for this podcast is the idea of having specified recovery training workouts that take care of your body. And strength training can be integrated with the flexibility in these specialized training units that you plug in once or twice a week as an addendum on top of what you currently would already be prescribing to your athletes. So we're not telling you that, oh, this is something that you have to throw out what you're doing and just do this. This is an addendum.
Right.
You keep the intense training that you're doing. This is adding more exercise, but this type of exercise is to help, again, spine strength, shoulders, the entire body. It's using traction and gravity to open up the joints and stretch, and it's to help the athlete so that they can perform at a higher level. It's also a flossing of the central nervous system, the spine, so the signals can fire better for athletic performance. So it's not just for stretching for the sake of stretching. And you know what, we're just working our spine for the sake of working our spine.
Right.
It's to help keep the athlete healthy as well as help their performance, because if this is done properly, you're getting an adjustment of the spine and those signals will fire better, so the athlete has better reaction time and so forth. So there's many, many benefits to this, on top of just plain exercise.
And I wanted to just make one quick point there. What Peter mentioned earlier with the traction on the spine, that's very close. Well, it's almost identical to what we'll do with on the glute ham machines, or whatever you call, different people call them. Having the athlete, just lay over the side and just hang out for a couple minutes, and because the nice thing about that, and this is something that a lot of athletes may not be aware of, even coaches, is that now the vertebrae are right on top of each other in a line, and then they can be decompressed naturally.
Elongated, and then
if you try to do it while the spine is in its lordosis, it doesn't create the same decompression. So I think that's one of the great points that Peter made earlier.
That's why I think the importance of this podcast is some of these training programs that are evolving and coming from these different spine institutes and research with athletes over in Russia that Peter has taken, and we've worked together and worked as a team to how do we get this to the masses. And in the next book, these are going to come out, these routines, and people can have access as well. We have them, some of them on YouTube, and we've spoken about them, and we hand this stuff out to the masses because it is important, and it is athletes. They can tell right away after doing them. They feel better. They function better.
I hope that in the next volume, Jet, we will detail two things that two fringe practices that are not quite in the West yet. One is compounding more and more with your stretching, using, for example, the complexes that we're using, and with your athletes. I hope that you're doing it, using eye stretching, eye exercises, while you're doing your arm and leg stretching. So you're compounding stretches of the arms and legs with your vision, enhancing stretching and other exercises. I took them from shooting to make your vision sharper, to prevent, to just in all possible ways to improve the eye muscles and strengthen your eye muscles, stretch your eye muscles and strengthen them, changing the side and stretching them left, right, up and down, all possible ways of stretching your eyes as you are stretching your arms and legs. This is an example of complex compounding. It improves not only the actual muscles that you're stretching, but it improves your overall coordination and your ability to control different parts of your body and different muscle systems at the same time. And it does not have to be synchronized. This is the very important thing, that as you're becoming more and more skillful in this, you desynchronize. In other words, you count to 20 to stretch your leg or your arm, and you're doing counting for stretching your eyes in a different pace. This is an example of training your body to be more coordinated and better, being in better control of all your muscle system and nervous system. That's one aspect that we hope to detail more in our book as we update it and do the second volume. Second is the use of stretches in pairs of participants. this is not easy in the West, where you have to now, and now in particular, when you have to stay away from each other 2 meters.
Right.
But the practice that I carry from the Soviet Union is we were taught as athletes to massage each other, to stretch each other, and do the basic osteo type stretching and relaxation when you lift your partner, when you press on around the chest, when you embrace someone, grab by the chest, press on the chest, and lift up to stretch the most important spine muscles and joints. And if this is done after each practice a little bit, this is much more effective than doing it once a month by a specialist, or when you already have pain. We have new research now that we mentioned in our current book, and I hope we detail it, that this kind of relaxation and stretching that you do after each practice, where you compress your spine, is recommended by medical and coaching professionals now. And I think our responsibility is to figure out how to deal with legal issues here, and how to deal with possible cultural restricting factors that might not allow our athletes to do this to each other. But
and the Chinese took those practices from the former Soviet Union. You see in all the training halls, they're working on adjustments of the spine and massage. They're trained exactly how you were in the sports school, to do the basic fundamental massage and adjustment for the spine. It is tough in the United States with restrictions.
We can definitely start with self-massage and self-stretching after each practice that is more
comprehensive.
More comprehensive. Yes, this would be a great start. And then see if we can develop a practice where you do it in partnership, where you do it as in pairs, as the most basic kind of commonly accepted stretch, when one assists another. That could be our next step. I don't know, but it's a question of time when we can do it, I think.
Yeah. One last thing, Peter, and I know this is important, that wasn't really brought up, is with technology, and it doesn't have to cost much at all. If one has a computer or internet access, there's great stretching routines that are dynamic or even static. Both Peter and I have become fans of a gentleman by the name of Sean Vigue. Sean Vigue is excellent. He's an ex-track athlete who puts out videos for the masses for free. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. These are quality, high-level routines. He's broken them down to different areas. If you have an injury, if it's shoulder or low back or hip or neck, and he does multiple videos. If someone is interested, search Sean, Sean Vigue. He's really an excellent yoga practitioner and instructor for athletes, and that's really what he focuses on for sport, and it's great.
For more than 10 sports, he has specific routines that are targeted for swimming, for ball games, for specific sports, which is great.
Yeah, so it's something that we we get out to all of our athletes so that when they're on their own, because we're only as a NCAA coach, you're only allowed so much time with the athletes. It's regulated. So certain things you would like to do, you don't have enough time to do. So you make recommendations, and we get as much training in under my watch as we can, and then we can email out different links for different things that we'd like them to work on. And those Sean Vigue videos are great for coaches and athletes for sure.
That'd be great for people to check out. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate the insight into this part of the book. And for all those watching, Fringe Methodologies, it's available on our site at uaconcepts.com. You can check us out there. Also available on Amazon, I believe. Yeah, check it out. A lot of great information in there that you'll be surprised by, I believe. It's almost an encyclopedia, I would dare say, but definitely worth checking out. I want to thank both of you guys for joining me again, as always. I really appreciate it, and look forward to talking here pretty soon again.
All right. Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Joseph. Thanks, Jed.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.